Okay, we'll start with this. Well, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, Matchroom has made their big announcement for May 1st. On May 1st, heavyweight main event, Derek Chisora versus Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker, who's coming off that win over his domestic rival, Junior Fa, against Derek Chisora, who is rebounding off that loss to Alexander Usyk. In truth, it's the co-main event that really has my attention here. Don't get me wrong. I very much like the Derek Chisora versus Joseph Parker fight. I do.
It's a good fight.
But the more titillating matchup, as far as I'm concerned, is the long-awaited, long-anticipated Taylor versus Jonas rematch. Their amateur rivalry has been rekindled in the professional ranks. We see that Dimitri Bivol, WBA light heavyweight champion, is going to be returning to action against Richards, which we knew already.
That comes as a surprise to no one.
It really is an all-star card, just as well. It comes as a surprise to no one that Chris Eubank Jr.'s next in-the-ring appearance is coming by way of a Matchroom card. I told you guys that perhaps, Chris, his relationship with the people over there at Matchroom, maybe it's not the best, but the relationship between the Sarlin brothers, Sarlin Promotions and Matchroom Promotions, is a good working relationship. Thus, Chris would still have access to Matchroom fights and Matchroom fighters on Matchroom cards by way of Sarlin Promotions, and that's what we see here. That's what's going on. Chris's fight is a tune-up fight, a shaking off the cobwebs fight, because this guy hasn't fought in a year. The same applies to Dimitri Bivol. That's the kind of fight that he's participating in, all things considered. But it's an all-star card that does feature Chris Eubank Jr., Dimitri Bivol. More importantly, as far as I'm concerned, Taylor versus Jonas, which to me is the best fight on the whole goddamn card. The speed and movement of Katie Taylor versus the punching power and accuracy of Natasha Jonas, who has been campaigning as a super featherweight, though given her physical dimensions, her frame, I think she'll make lightweight just fine. Moreover, I think her power will carry.
Not having to cut that extra 5 pounds to make 130.
That could leave Tasha Jonas feeling even more invigorated, more energized, more galvanized, not just because she doesn't have to cut the extra 5 pounds, but because of the stage she'll be fighting on. This will be the biggest stage she's ever fought on in her professional career, and everything is at stake. Vengeance for what took place in the amateur ranks, and lest we forget, all the belts. This is an undisputed lightweight title fight. I want to say that I actually think Tasha has the punching power to not only hurt Katie Taylor, but most any girl at or around 130, 135 pounds. She's that big a puncher, and she is that accurate. Though the speed and movement, the agility of Katie Taylor can help to offset that power, because Katie Taylor...
She ain't no one-trick pony.
Katie Taylor can play both the aggressor and the defender. I'm very much excited for that fight. I'm glad that Natasha Jonas got this opportunity when, things just didn't materialize for that Terry Harper rematch. This is an even bigger fight, an even bigger opportunity that I've no doubts offers up a bigger payday to Tasha. We know how big of an opportunity this is for Tasha. For Katie, however, it is a different opportunity, a different kind of opportunity, because I feel that Katie Taylor doesn't get enough credit for some of her victories.
She don't.
The Ana Esther Sanchez fight, she beat Sanchez easy, where both Chantel Cameron and Jessica McCaskill struggled with that same Ana Esther Sanchez. And that's after Katie dominated Sanchez. I feel that Katie doesn't get enough credit for the victory over Rose Vellante, who was, and I think still is, one of the most dangerous punchers at 135 pounds. These are victories that fly pretty low on the radar because, most of the boxing community at large, they aren't familiar with Sanchez. They aren't familiar with Rose Vellante. They are, however, familiar with Natasha Jonas and her exhilarating fight against Terry Harper. This is an opportunity for Katie to remind people why she is, where she is, how she got there. She goes out there and she beats Natasha Jonas easy. That's going to speak volumes about not only Katie Taylor, but the quality of her competition and why, in some circles, she's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter.
The entire sport of women's boxing.
Now, when it comes to the main event of that same card, the Joseph Parker versus Derek Chisora fight, context is key here, folks. Derek Chisora is coming off a loss. He is. But he didn't get beat like a drum in that fight, you understand. It was a competitive fight. It was a competitive loss. And given Del Boy's way of going about things, he's going to force Joseph Parker into a situation to where either Joseph is going to have to let his hands go to keep this guy off him, or he's going to beat Joe. There's still a lot of people out there that think, Joe, he's a decent boxer, he is, and he's got some tools, but he ain't got no dog in him. He ain't got no mean streak. And because he ain't got no mean streak, You know, a guy like Derek might be a stylistic nightmare for him. You can't lay off with this guy, you understand?
Derek ain't coming to box you.
I say it all the time. Derek ain't there for no fucking boxing match. If he's coming to take your fucking head off. And that puts Joe's back against the wall to where either he's gonna knock you out or you're going to have to knock him out. I could see some questions being raised as far as the strength of the card to the consumer because, while for us in the United States, we're going to be seeing this as part of our DAZN subscription, for our friends over there in the United Kingdom across the Atlantic Ocean, this is going to be a pay-per-view, and one has to ask oneself if this is pay-per-view worthy, if this is value for money. I think that depends on who you ask, because for the most part, by way of social media, the card's announcement is getting a very positive reception. Nevertheless, there is still a question
as to whether or not this is pay-per-view worthy.
I'll tell you what I think. There have been a lot of pay-per-views here stateside. A lot of fights that really don't belong on pay-per-view, and there are that many more set to take place that also don't belong on pay-per-view. I mean, Gervonta Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz was not a pay-per-view worthy matchup as far as I'm concerned. And the undercard, highly forgettable. I can't even remember what was on that card. I think the same is true for Spence versus Danny Garcia.
Weak card.
The strongest pay-per-view card I've seen here stateside in recent memory would have to have been the Manny Pacquiao versus Keith Thurman fight. You know, that fight and that card was a strong card. I think something similar applies to the Charlo doubleheader, the card that featured Jermall Charlo versus Sergey Derevyanchenko and Jermell Charlo in what was a unification match against the then unified champion, Jason Rosario. Those are two of the better cards that I've seen here stateside, but make no mistake, there's been no shortage of them. Spence versus Garcia.
Both of them.
Mikey and Danny. I mean, I don't think that either Mikey Garcia or Danny Garcia put forward a pay-per-view worthy performance. Moreover, I don't think that those fights warranted the hefty pay-per-view price tag that we all have to pay here stateside. This ain't $20 or 25 pounds or whatever it is, the way it is in the United Kingdom. Over here in the United States, if you wanted to see those fights, you had to come out of pocket $80
for each one.
Wilder versus Ortiz too. Who the fuck was asking for that?
Do you think anybody should have to pay $80 to see Andy Ruiz versus Chris Arreola?
That, if you want my opinion, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, I'm an American consumer. And as an American consumer, I have to pay several times more to see a pay-per-view than the Brits do. So when I see this card, an all-star card that features Chris Eubank Jr., Dimitri Bivol, a titillating matchup between Natasha Jonas and Katie Taylor, and a heavyweight matchup that's sure to be a tear-up between Derek Chisora and Joseph Parker, I look at this card, and I can't complain. Granted, I'm going to be seeing the card as part of my DAZN subscription. But compared to what pay-per-view matchups we've been seeing here stateside, this is a better card than those cards were. There's only one or two cards that happen here stateside that I can think of that were a little better than this, and that was mostly due to the main events, not even the cards in their entirety. Any of the undercards were highly forgettable.
I couldn't tell you what was on the undercard of Davis versus Santa Cruz.
I can understand the frequency of pay-per-views in any market chapping the fight fans' asses. I can understand the boxing community perhaps being in a bit of an uproar over how many fights end up on pay-per-view. I get it. But I guess the message to those people I would like to impart is that it could be worse. You guys over there across the Atlantic Ocean could be paying what we're paying here in America for the same frequency of cards, for the same frequency of pay-per-views.
We pay 3 times as much for a pay-per-view as you guys do.
So believe me when I tell you, it could be worse. Much worse. Mikey Garcia's less than ambitious performance almost immediately comes to mind because at least on this card, the main event and the co-main event, you have 4 fighters that are really going to give it their all. They're really going to try to win. They're really going to make a show of it, more than, say, Mikey Garcia did against Errol Spence Jr. And that ran the boxing fan here in America about $80 a pop. You know, I'll put it to you another way. If this card were a pay-per-view here in America, for the same price that you guys are paying for it over there in the United Kingdom, not only would I buy it, but here in America, that would be value for money. You get to see Eubank, you get to see Bivol, you get to see Katie and Natasha, and you get to see Joe and Derek.
For $25.
And for what, $20? You do realize that they charged people $30 here in America to watch that Superwoman card featuring Clarissa Shields. Yeah.
That was $30.
And I bought it. So believe me when I tell you, I ain't fucking around. If this same card with these same fighters were a pay-per-view here stateside for the same price that you guys are paying for it over there in the United Kingdom, not only would I buy it, I'd enjoy it.
So enjoy it. Stop crying.
Don't yell at her.
And finally, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Jaime Munguia versus Suliecki is reportedly in talks to take place in April, according to Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix. Gennady Golovkin versus Jaime Munguia had previously been mooted. Unclear what this means for Triple G's next fight. And Jaime Munguia's quality of competition really hasn't been the best. He gets away with it. He does. He gets away with it because nobody heralds him as the second coming of Chavez Sr. Nobody heralds him as the second coming of El Terrible or Marcos Antonio Barrera. Nobody heralds him as a pound-for-pound star or a future all-time great. They take him for what he is. They take him at face value. A limited fighter who makes for a fun night of boxing. Because that's what that Toriano Johnson fight was. That was a tear-up. That was a barn burner. We all know about Jaime Munguia's defensive deficiencies, his drawbacks. We all know what kind of fighter he is, and we accept him as such.
Because he's not in that pound-for-pound conversation.
I'll give you an example. If you take to Twitter and you say that Jaime Munguia is a limited fighter, all you're going to get is a bunch of guys agreeing with you. They're going to tell you he's a limited fighter, but he's a fun fighter to watch because he's limited. That's the only thing that's going to happen.
If you say that Jermall Charlo beats him.
If you say that Demetrius Andrade or even Ryota Murata. If you say that Gennady Golovkin beats Jaime and beats him easy, once again, for the most part, you're just going to get a bunch of guys agreeing with you. There's not going to be any outrage. There's not going to be any uproar because we don't have any illusions about who and what Jaime Munguia is. We all know that they're taking their time with this fighter. We all know that they're moving him slowly.
If I tell you that he's protected...
You gonna argue with me about it?
If I tell you he's got a thinner resume than Teofimo Lopez...
You gonna argue with me about it?
Most people won't.
And that's why he gets away with fighting the kind of guys that he's been fighting, because we all know they're moving him along slowly, and none of us are in disagreement about that. That's why even a Suliecki, who throws good straight punches, fast hands, crisp 1-2, doesn't take the best punch, but even a guy like that is a step up for Jaime. Oh, I dare say a Gabriel Rosado fight makes for an interesting night of boxing with Jaime Munguia.
It's a good fight, too.
This is how he gets away with this. This is why he can walk away from a Gennady Golovkin fight, assuming he's the one that walked away. I really don't know what the problem here is. I don't know why this fight with Triple G isn't happening. I don't know specifically what the problem is. Better still, he can operate with complete impunity, not having fought the likes of a Triple G, because nobody has any illusions about what he is.
Can Triple G say the same thing, though?
Some people still have Triple G ranked on their pound-for-pound lists. In some circles, he's still viewed as a pound-for-pound fighter. Not here on Ring IQ. He's not on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Better still, there are those who do rank him as such. He is still talked about in some circles in that spectrum. Moreover, it costs you more to stage a Triple G fight than it costs you to stage a Jaime Munguia fight. I mean, how much money have DAZN frittered away on this guy? And I don't see the people at DAZN applying the pressure on Gennady Golovkin to face a premier opponent the way they did with Canelo. I don't see them applying that pressure on this guy. And every time this guy gets out there, he costs them millions upon millions of dollars to fight what has been, for the most part, soft competition. Steve Rolls,
Camille Zeremata.
Those were multi-million-dollar fights for Triple G. Multi-million-dollar paydays. I will admit that the Sergey Derevianchenko fight was a solid fight with a solid fighter, though I don't know that what that costed DAZN was worth it. He got $14 million for Steve Rolls. Another $14 million for Sergey Derevianchenko.
I think they paid him $7 million for Zeremata.
I gotta tell you, it's a waste of money. I gotta tell you that the amount of money that this guy costs every time he gets out there, I mean, are they really getting a return on this guy? At what point do the higher-ups at DAZN apply the pressure on Gennady Golovkin that they wanted to apply to Canelo Alvarez? When are you going to pressure this guy to fight the winner of Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams? Because it's not likely that he unifies with Ryota Murata in the near future, because Ryota Murata hasn't fought in 12 months or a little over 12 months. The fight is possible after Ryota Murata gets back out there and has a tune-up fight. I don't think Ryota Murata is going to walk into the squared circle with Gennady Golovkin off a year of inactivity.
It is a big fight.
In the Far East, that is a fight of considerable value that could do monster ratings in the Japanese market.
It really would.
Generate great revenue in ticket sales. I mean, it is a worthwhile matchup, but it's not a matchup that you can make straight away. Not here today. Here today, Gennady Golovkin needs to fight someone.
Someone good.
He just had a lighter touch in Kamil Zeremata. Mandatory or no mandatory, we all knew that Kamil Zeremata...
Gonna get his fucking ass kicked.
Now that Andrade versus Williams is official, Demetrius Andrade's not available for a unification fight. Not that Gennady Golovkin wants one, at least not with him. Ryota Murata's not likely to unify with Gennady Golovkin off a year of inactivity. Jaime Munguia is reported to be fighting Maciej Suliecki in his very next fight. This really narrows the field of options for Triple G. I mean, one of the only solid guys at or around this weight that I can think of that could be a dance partner, a good dance partner for Triple G is top-ranked zone Rob Brandt. Bear in mind, a Rob Brandt fight isn't a big fight, but it's a solid fight.
We should get paid $7 million to fight Rob Brandt.
Well, he might. They've got to pay him his contract minimum. Whatever that is, if it's $7 million or if it's $14 million, or if they got to play with the numbers. One way or another, this guy costs them millions upon millions of dollars every single time he gets out there.
Starting to wonder how long he can get away with this.
I am starting to wonder, how long will DAZN continue to break the bank just to pay Gennady Golovkin to fight soft competition? It's no concern of mine, really. After all, I'm just a fight fan. I'm just the consumer. It doesn't cost me a goddamn thing. At least nowhere near as much as what it's costing the people over there at DAZN. However, as a consumer, as a boxing fan, I do want to see Triple G fight someone solid.
After this, there's no reason he shouldn't fight Demetrius Andrade.
If I'm being honest, given what this guy costs the people over there at DAZN, there's no reason it should have gotten this far. You have 2 of the 4 world champions in the middleweight division on the same side of the street. You're not having any luck getting Jermall Charlo in the ring with your guy Demetrius Andrade. The Canelo Alvarez ship has sailed for Triple G. Canelo's up there at 168, and unless you mean to follow him...
That chapter is closed.
And for whatever reason, things aren't working out with Jaime Munguia. I don't know why. There shouldn't be that many issues associated with that fight. For God's sake, Jaime fights on the same platform as Triple G. What went wrong? One way or another, something did, and now Jaime is fighting someone else. So you have to ask yourself, at what point do the people at DAZN pressure Gennady Golovkin to unify with Demetrius Andrade because nobody else seems to want to?
This guy's costing you guys a lot of fucking money.
So at what point do they put their foot down?